You're listening to Not Good Enough, an inadequate response to inadequate responses. My name is Mitch Alexander.
I'm Tom McLean.
I'm Tom Lang.
And unfortunately, Evie can't make it today, so you've got to deal with the boys club.
To kick us off, today McLean has a very special announcement to make for Not Good Enough.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked about it much before on the pod because we are an Australian-focused podcast, but I think it's remiss of us to not acknowledge that there, is a world beyond the shores of Australia and political developments in that scene do matter. So Not Good Enough is proud to endorse Bernie Sanders for president. But
fucking goddamn it. McLean's recording wasn't going the first time, so we got 3 minutes in, so we've had to do that bit a second time, and it's funnier this time. And if he cuts this bit out, I'm gonna know, because he always does that. But this time, McLean had his recording fuck up, and we had to do it a second time, and it was still funny for some fucking reason.
That's just my delivery so solid.
I do want to point out how just serendipitous it is to have a presidential candidate that is very pro healthcare and social support for everybody in the midst of a time when it is so evident that we need healthcare and social support for every American and every person in the world. So best of luck to him.
That's the problem with doing an Australian-focused podcast, is that we don't really keep up with what's happening internationally, but I've got really good feelings about Bernie Sanders pulling this one through.
I mean, America's the richest, most powerful country in the world. If they can't tackle an outbreak, then what does that say about their economic systems? That would show that everything they've said has been a lie. That'd be silly.
Yeah, really, that would really challenge our conceptions of what rich and powerful mean,
right?
Wouldn't it?
Imagine if America was digging a mass grave right now, or if they had an election that was clearly fraudulent. That'd be embarrassing for them.
Well,
and tragic, honestly, tragic, and sorry to all the Americans out there.
It's an ironic endorsement. Obviously, Bernie Sanders dropped out very recently of the presidential race, but at the same time, it's a genuine endorsement. Still vote for Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to vote for him. Fuck it. Doesn't matter now. I'm going to write in a vote and I'm going to give him my Australian address. Who gives a shit?
Yeah. At this point, I feel like the American electoral system is so broken that I can't... It's like if he ran third party and was just like, fuck it, the Bernie Sanders party, I honestly don't see it really being that bad an idea. Okay, we're getting into American politics. Actually, I see now how bad an idea this is.
The official not good enough stance is that Americans' electoral system is fucked and they should adopt an Australian system where you can have preferential voting and a mining magnate can buy the outcome for $60 million.
I feel like our electoral process is decent, but all of the media and everything around it is broken. Like when you actually go in to do the polls and stuff, I feel like we've got that down. It's everything outside of the polling booth that isn't working so well.
Yeah, like the sign on the front that says the correct way to vote is to vote for the Liberal Party.
Absolutely.
In Chinese.
But I have a decent amount of faith that when I put in my ballot and I mark those boxes, they go to the right place and they get counted in the right way pretty quickly.
When it's a paper vote, there's also the electoral voting system that uses this technology that has had some pretty proven security flaws that the Australian Electoral Commission has refused to even acknowledge. But let's not.
Is that the
get into
same
that.
Australian Electoral Commission that found that those signs written in Chinese telling people to vote for the Liberal Party weren't political engineering?
Guys, if we think we've got too much to talk about right now, just wait until it's a bloody election. Not good enough election special.
All I'm saying is that the Australian Electoral Commission does a good job and everyone there works real hard and I'm proud of it.
McLean, is your dad the Australian Electoral Commission? What is this fucking sucking up?
I think that all of their signage is very beautiful and they have a good colour scheme.
Let's bring it back. Let's focus in on some actual Australian news. Let's get those good vibes down. Let's crush those happy laughs and bright smiles that we've got and talk about the fact that previously convicted pedophile Cardinal George Pell has had his conviction squashed and overturned, and he is no longer legally a convicted pedophile.
Right. He's still, we probably can't even say that.
When you say you've just got to say he was convicted by a jury
Yeah.
of being a pedophile.
Jury convicted. Which, I mean, it's supposed to be a jury of his peers, but he was the third highest ranking Catholic in the world, so not really.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in the jury was a pedophile.
That's really not fair on Pell. None of them were obscenely rich. None of them had tax-free wealth flowing through their institution and into their pockets, and able to afford the best lawyers on earth, as opposed to giving all that money to victims and homeless people and people that need it.
None of them were exempt from the interstate travel ban.
George Pell is more of a free man than most of us right now. He's just on a little road trip up to New South Wales. He's doing interviews on the Australian, on the radio. He's bloody getting the word out there. And look, you're allowed to interview any non-convicted pedophile you want. It just seems odd that that is the non-convicted pedophile you choose to interview. I feel like there's a lot of other people out there.
It's also pretty funny that, like, the Australia, like, you know, Andrew Bolt and everyone, they're like,
Yeah,
vindicated.
they're so vindicated.
Finally, this is a true cause of justice. You all were saying he was a pedophile. The jury said he was a pedophile, but the High Court said that it wasn't beyond reasonable doubt. What do you have to say about that?
He got off on a technicality.
Justice was served.
Yeah, like, what do I have to say about that? It's like...
He wasn't found innocent. He wasn't acquitted.
Yeah, I still think it's fucked.
The High Court concluded that the beyond reasonable doubt threshold was not met. That's it. That's as far as it goes. A jury still listened to all the evidence for days and days, and at the end of that, we're like, sounds like he did it.
Yeah, there is
Put him in
now
prison.
only a reasonable doubt that he is a pedophile. So, okay. Yes, there is a doubt.
Isaac has just pasted in the notes doc that this headline, George Pell says inmates of Barwon Jail cheered when acquittal was handed down. With his own comment, a thing that definitely happened.
And this is the thing that gets me, is that he is so insulated from the reality of the situation. He will never have a normal life. You know what I mean? He had an ex-leader of this country after his conviction stump for him, which, not to get all Epstein brain, but like, this is the exact same thing we had there, where fucking like Prince Andrew and the Clintons were still chummy with Jeffrey Epstein until they couldn't be for whatever reason. In Australia, we had, like I said, the third highest ranking Catholic in the world, who was in the same, whatever it's called, the same area in the 70s and 80s where widespread child molestation was happening, and he was in charge of both the money and from moving people around, and it just so happens that the priests and the cardinals and whatever in that area at the time were following patterns that we have now found all around the world that the Catholic Church was doing. So I'm very fucking sorry, but I'm pretty sure George Pell is guilty of fucking heaps more shit. Now, I can't be proven. I'm not insinuating that he is. And if his character is in any way defamed by this is a comedy podcast. But he's a fucking evil human, part of an evil institution.
For a comedy podcast.
It's this idea, like, fuck.
For a comedy podcast, we do sometimes have some big gaps between the jokes. But that's part of the comedy. That's the setup.
I put on a funny voice earlier.
It's a new age of comedy.
I think just my favorite thing, and we probably shouldn't talk about this too much because it has been, fuck it. His own defense lawyer used the term plain vanilla sexual penetration, which I feel that's a desperate kind of, for someone who claims not to have done it, seems like trying to downplay how bad it would have been had he done it. Is not the tactic
That
you should
one's
take.
genuinely an interesting one, because that was an argument that was deployed after the guilty verdict had been handed down, and the lawyer was trying to reduce the sentencing as much as possible. So you can't reduce sentencing by saying, actually, he wasn't guilty. You have to use that kind of technicality. So it's not so much an admission of guilt as it is just a lawyer saying anything to reduce the sentence from their horribly evil client. And, you know, you can just cast whatever character judgment you want on the lawyer there as well, listener. That's your prerogative.
I hope he gets paid enough.
Yeah, I think it's... You put the, you put the, like, moral indictment on the person who took that type of job. Like, I don't think it's weird to hear that type of language. I think it's weird that, like, someone does the job of that type of language. But I mean, like there's the argument that, you know, people do need defense lawyers, and like McLean said, it wasn't actually an admission of guilt. They're just trying to, like, get the sentence down. But just imagine that lawyer who has to, like, live with himself every night. Like, he's just sitting in bed. Like, he'll be there 20 years from now, like, vanilla sex. What was I think? Fucking hell, that's so
He goes home to his family that night.
I reckon he's just like, I'm a lawyer. It's my job to say fuck shit. Like,
Probably.
There's a group of people who are pretty happy to abdicate the sort of fundamental principle that if you do something, you did it. That they're just like, oh no, I was acting in my capacity as a lawyer, as though like your nature of a human is suspended for the period that you're on the clock.
But it's even like he goes home to his family that night, or he hangs out with his friends, and they're like, oh, what did you do today? Did you have a good case? Who were you defending? And he's like, oh, the pedophile guy, the big pedophile case. Oh yeah, how'd that go? Well, I was on the side of the pedophile. I reckon I did pretty good. I reckon I got him off.
But these people cultivate their own social circles. He's going home to his family and his friends, and they're like, "Oh, you're doing a pretty good job of making sure that our good mate George Pell doesn't go to jail."
Yeah,
they're really going after him for stuff that he didn't do. I mean, it's the Catholic Church, for God's sake. Well, they need to be able to abuse some kids now and again. It's an important institution.
Yeah, they're all very rich Australians. They all very probably allegedly abuse kids themselves. Anyway, moving on.
Comedy podcast.
I think we need a musical sting for this bit. I reckon like a really rockin' electric guitar. Nationalise it.
I love it.
I thought you meant I needed to write a pedophile-themed musical sting. Come on.
So, in nationalised it news, there's some cool news coming out of Spain. In Spain at the moment, they are pushing for a UBI, a universal basic income, but the reporting coming out seems to suggest that they just want to keep it in place after the pandemic.
Fuck yes.
Like they're just like, oh, we need everyone to be getting money every single week so they can keep buying stuff, stimulating the economy, paying rent, getting food, and making sure we can keep Spain afloat. And why would we stop that after this?
It's great.
Yeah. Trickle up economics works. It's good.
Legit, yes.
And the argument people always put in place against stuff like a universal basic income or friggin' welfare in general is they say, oh, people will just they'll just waste this money. And it's like, what are you wasting money on? Because anytime you waste money, you're spending that on goods and services. Yeah. You're buying things, you're buying food, you're buying friggin' useless bullshit. Great. Which is exactly what economic stimulus is. Everything you spend money on gets the economy going. Yeah.
Yeah, the best way to waste money is to hoard it.
Or they are horribly and unconscionably spending it on untaxed drugs. Now, I'm not sure what the fix for that could be. But they're spending it all on marijuana and we're not getting it back.
Right. But here's the thing. Who are they giving that money to? The drug dealer. What's he spending it on?
Rent.
Heat lamps.
Probably fast cars and taxed goods and rent. Exactly. Heat lamps, they come from Bunnings. That employs many fine casual workers.
Yeah, if you nationalise the energy grid, that weed farmer is going to be paying a lot back into the economy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and also a bit closer to home, Queensland Greens MP Michael Berkman has called for the nationalising of private hospitals in the state once the pandemic threat has passed.
Fuck yes.
Nationalise it.
Just sort of going, all of these private hospitals, they're ours now. Which I think, like, the two ways I'm looking at it is he can either look at it and go, you were useless. You were less than useless in this fucking pandemic. You held up the treatment of people by claiming there was issues with your... Fuck you. We are taking that back and never again squandering a national resource as valuable as something in the healthcare sector. Or he can go, oh, cool, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
Still, though, you're healthcare. You're a national good. You're not private anymore. You're not for profit.
I'm going to read out his actual quote from his tweet because he makes a phenomenal point here. He says,
Hell yeah.
During COVID-19 and almost every year during flu season, our government has to lease beds from private hospitals to cope with demand.
It's crazy.
We're constantly running at capacity and handing over public dollars to private companies who make billions in annual profits. Private hospitals get billions in public money. They rely on Medicare rebates, private insurance subsidies, and public university and hospital staff training to survive. It's time we use this dollar for public good, not lining the pockets of multinational private corporations. It's dead on.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's great.
Nationalise it.
That is amazing.
Fucking awesome. God bless you, Michael Berkman, you legend. If you're in Queensland, vote for him. Not good enough also endorses Greens MP Michael Berkman.
Yeah, for US president. Get him in there. No, that's phenomenal stuff. That's great. In unemployment and, social welfare news, the government is still just lagging behind on making sure that renters are taken care of. The narrative continues to be, sort it out with your landlord. You know how everyone has a personal relationship with their landlord? Just hit them up and say, hey, mate, can't make rent. And they'll be like, no worries.
I've been living in this house for near 10 years, which is really, really friggin' long for a renter. I honestly would not know if my landlord existed. They may be an investment corporation overseas or something. I've only ever gone through a succession of fairly incompetent real estate agents.
So I used to live with Lang, and we had multiple times where we had a property inspection due, and we would get a call from the real estate agent being like, hey, where do you live?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Like, do you not have our address?
Doing a great job.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. I mean, it's worth keeping in mind as well, this narrative of sort it out with your landlord was originally sorted out with your state premier. Morrison was talking a big game about how it's down to the states, it's not a federal issue, the state's going to look after it, blah, 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 blah. Now they've had to turn to sort it out with your landlord. It's not our position to do that. Keep in mind that landlords and real estate agents, the people that they want us to, quote unquote, work it out with, are the same people that had a blanket letter sent out from ASIC saying that if you tell your renters that they could potentially draw from super to pay rent, that might be financial advice from a non-expert, and that can run the risk of your firm getting a fine of up to $1 million. Those are the same people.
Yeah, or prison time. Yeah, no unlicensed financial advice from the landlords. No, people just kicking people out during a pandemic is genuinely disgusting.
It's a blatant thing also to sort it out with your landlord. The same as, why don't you negotiate your pay with your boss? This is why we have unions. An individual cannot effectively negotiate against someone who holds that amount of power over them. And being in control of where somebody lives, and if you can kick someone out of their house, that is practically the most amount of power you can have over a person next to whether they live or die.
It's even more during a pandemic. Usually, if you don't, the leverage that a landlord or real estate agent has over you in a negotiation is, I'll kick you out of your house and you'll be homeless.
Yeah.
The leverage they have today is, I'll kick you out of your house and you'll be homeless during the worst pandemic the world has seen in our lifetimes. It's not a meaningful negotiation. It's a negotiation with a gun to your head.
It's disgusting.
And what leverage do you have over them? I don't really want to pay that. They'll be like, fine, we'll get somebody else to pay it. We've seen the property prices. We can, if I got kicked out here, they would bump the rent up.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
A few $100s a month.
What the other thing about this is that renters are, in a weird material analysis, a type of worker. If you have a large pool of homeless people with money to spend on rent, then you're going to be able to get other people into that house. If someone on 100,000 is they've got a whole bunch of savings, but they can't keep up their rent in a very, very expensive place, suddenly gets kicked out and they need rent for a place that would be appropriate for someone on 28k, they can just go there for a while and they've got savings to do that. It works in landlords' favour in the same way it works in bosses' favour to have a whole bunch of desperate people unconnected going, fuck, I need this resource that you are hoarding. It's fucked. It's absolutely fucked.
Yeah, it's garbage.
So if you are, we're going to call this out again in the actions later on, but if you're in any way organising a rent strike, a rent amnesty, any sort of collective action on this, we are wanting to hear from you guys and wanting to get everyone in touch in the same way that we want to get in touch with you. So we'll put some stuff up in the show notes, but definitely get in touch with us because we've got 6 months.
Such an important issue is just keeping roofs over people's heads. And if you know about that, absolutely get in touch with us because we'll put shout outs and try and support you as much as we can because the shit matters.
And if you have any news about specific landlords or real estate agents being especially good or especially bad, that'd be interesting to hear about as well.
Yeah, and I suppose
send them to us and we'll delete them straight away because they don't fit the narrative.
If you're a landlord who's listening to the podcast and still listening, just don't fucking kick out your tenants no matter what. And if you're like, but I need the rent because I'm struggling as well, you demanding that rent is just literally handballing exactly that problem onto your tenant. And That's all you're doing is that morally you're just handballing it. And that
there is a logic chain. There's a logic chain being missed in this whole thing. Is that renters need a place to live. Oh, but the landlord needs money for their mortgage or maybe their rent. It's like, if they've still got another house, they can also join the strike. They are also still good to squat in that house. We're talking about literal shelter. We're not talking about investments. We're not talking about annual income. We're not talking about future projections. We're talking about the literal walls and roofs over people's houses. If a landlord has that, then they're already above and a step up. So if they're worried about their mortgage, stop paying the fucking mortgage as well. That's the point.
Also, there is support, and if not, there needs to be support. But there is a lot of support being offered at the moment, and it's being rolled out more and more. But all of that support should come from the people above you in the chain. It should not come from the people below you. Yep. So as an employee who's lost their job or as a renter, you should be getting support from your employer or from the government or from your landlord. As a landlord who's lost rental income, you should be getting support from your bank or the government. If you're a bank that's lost income, I don't know, fuck you, you're the biggest. You shouldn't have taken on all those risks if you weren't prepared to suffer the consequences.
Yeah.
You had billions in profits.
Yes.
You should have put some aside for a rainy day.
Yeah. Nationalize the banks.
Please. Alrighty. Drilling the focus back down again before we just start getting polemic. The JobKeeper supplement, the stimulus package that's being rolled out, has left out hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who need it the most. So the Liberal government can go and get fucked.
The estimate is 2 million people. Yeah, it's garbage. We spoke about this briefly last week, so I'm not going to hit it too hard this week. But basically, the JobKeeper payment continues to exclude huge swaths of society. So this is all casual workers who have been at their place of work for less than a year, which is very, very common among casual workers. The people on the disability support pension have been left out of it as well, and also the carers allowance. So if you are unable to work because of a disability or are caring for somebody who's unable to work because of a disability, you're still well below the poverty line on any government supports. The AUWU actually has been talking about this, and Ruston, the social services minister, could extend that $550 a week coronavirus supplement to the disability support and carers payments without any additional legislation. That is just already in her power to do it, and she can do it, and she hasn't done it. So in terms of like messaging an MP or something, Anne Ruston's the person to do it, and AUW are the people to follow for progress on that.
It's really trash. It's like they're seeing the need for this welfare and this stimulus package, and they're rolling it out slowly. But I get the feeling that like getting the Liberal government to actually give welfare to a large sector of the population that needs it is kind of like getting a shitty teen to effectively mow the lawn. It's always like, I've done it. Well, you haven't. You've left that whole bit over there. Okay. All right. Now I've done it. No, you've still missed all of these little patches. You have to mow the whole lawn. I've done it. But it's so much work. Yeah, if you'd fucking mowed it all at once, just mow it all, we could be done by now. But no, you're having to drag you through this whole process, kicking and screaming.
I've got to draw the line somewhere.
You don't, though. Universal.
I'm not doing the backyard.
That, by the way, is Josh Frydenberg's response on Insiders this morning after David Spears sort of gently grilled him, I suppose, about the fact that... also migrant workers are being completely left out of this situation. David Spears was like, so what do you say to migrant workers who aren't eligible for JobKeeper? And Frydenberg was like, they can access their super. And he's like, what if they don't have anything in their super? Well, they can talk about it with their employer. What if they get let go? Well, going back to their country of origin is always an option. Like,
is
just...
it?
Yeah.
How? How are they getting home?
Fucking...
Yeah.
Well, how are they get also, like, what is that as a response? Like, hey,
That's
some large
garbage.
sector of our society is going to be fucked by, like, the economic crisis. And his response is like, maybe they should try being in a different society.
This is the weird thing, is like, so Josh Frydenberg is the treasurer of our country. He's the treasurer of Australia. But he is infested with the capital L and the small L liberal mindset, the neoliberal mindset that everything should be down to the private market. Now, if he was the CEO of a business or something, then that response would still be just as evil, but it would make more sense because it's like, well, why don't businesses just take care of it? Why don't you work it out with your boss? I started as a janitor and now I'm CEO. And then I privatized the cleaning company. I outsourced it to a third party so they can't take my job. But like, so that makes a little bit more sense. I can at least respect that.
And now our cleaning bill is tripled and our corridors are really dirty.
I can at least respect that as a response from the private sector, but it's especially galling when you hear that from the fucking government. The government is saying, no, it's not the government's job. Well, what the fuck is your job then? Get out of the way. You clearly don't like it. Why would you take the job of being in the government if you think the private sector can do things better? Because surely you should take that to the logical conclusion and think to yourself, I can do better work in the private sector. Fuck off.
Well, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but this is the same government that argued that a government does not have a responsibility to care for its own people. So if they can't even arrive at that point, like Josh Frydenberg certainly isn't going to say, oh, we have a responsibility to care for people from other countries. We don't even have a responsibility to care for our own people.
What do you have a responsibility for? It's this classic kind of, and you see there's a lot, there's like right-wing conservative mindset that needs somebody to be on the outside or the other side. It's like, you've got to draw the line somewhere. If there's someone we're not giving welfare to, then we can be okay with welfare because we still go, all right, we had to earn this. We're special in some way. There's someone who's undeserving. But if suddenly you give welfare to everybody, then you're like, oh, hang on. But what if someone's bad? They still get welfare. Okay, but what if they're not like us? They still get welfare. But then, are we not special? Are we not the inside? What about the out-group? There is no out-group.
Yeah, Josh Ryan's like, oh, well, you've got to draw the line somewhere. Like, mate, you just made $130 billion appear out of nowhere because money isn't real. And he's like, oh, it's still a bit real, though. Like, you don't have to draw the line.
What you're saying is,
a society can support its people.
I like to draw the line somewhere. And I like to draw it between us and brown people, preferably.
Yeah, you have to draw the line somewhere. And when I say have to, I mean it fills me with a giddy, almost sexual joy to know that I'm leaving people out.
Yeah.
Josh Frydenberg would be the type of person who would gladly put his hand up and request the medieval job of being the one to raise the gate during a time of crisis. He would just as he just watches the peasants try to rush in away from the horde and just knowing that he's sentenced people to death. You have to draw the line somewhere, my liege.
You have to draw the line somewhere, Josh, and the way to draw it is around everybody.
He'd love to draw the line just around himself, but he reluctantly agrees he needs other people to make food and stuff.
Josh Frydenberg is an island.
This is not a joke that'll translate to the podcast, but like imagine just like me drawing a line and it's sort of just like I hold it up and it's in the shape of a big like middle finger and it's pointed at Josh Frydenberg and I've drawn him real ugly. That's my contribution.
It's pretty good. We'll put that in the notes.
Thanks, man.
Put that in the show
notes. Cool. So
coronavirus pandemic. We should get little stings for all of these. I do have a coronavirus sting. It's the
Oh, do you? I didn't know you used that on specific segments. I just thought they were funny and random.
Look, I'm not careful about it.
They are just random, you motherfucker.
It's however he feels.
I put the coronavirus one before the coronavirus stuff, and all the others are random.
Sick.
That's the pattern.
We should come up with some more. That's another thing as an action. Get in touch with us in any way you want to hear a song of your choice be butchered by the MIDI programming that McLean does.
We should make more stings, says Mitch, who has no responsibility for making the stings. Very federal government of you.
Which of us is a semi-professional musician and which of us is the one making the stings? Because I don't feel like they're the same person.
Damn. I don't know, who can say. Anyway, in coronavirus news, Dan Andrews, Victorian Premier, has extended the state of emergency in Victoria to midnight, 14th of May, which means nothing to you. Essentially, the lockdown laws supersede that. Just know that if the government here in Victoria needed to, they could reappropriate some resources from one sector to another. That's all.
It means that as of midnight on the 14th of May, coronavirus will be defeated.
Turns back into a pumpkin.
We got him.
Yes. It also means that, sorry, yes.
I feel like that might not even be news that is important to most people. But hey, all right.
I think it's worth noting, though, that, like, we are in a state of emergency that is being led at a state level. And if you didn't hear that a premier of one of the biggest states in the country has extended a state of emergency, that just lends an air to how big this fucking whole thing is and how just weird it is. Because it should be news. If we have a state of emergency now for more than a month, and it's been extended to more than a month rather, that's huge news. But the way the news is working at the moment, it's like,
yeah. I think there's a lot of people who are wondering, like, oh, how far off is the sort of, when can we go out and go to the pub again? And it's like, there's some sort of murmurings of like 2 weeks maybe. And it's like, look, the state of emergency has been extended into halfway through May. Probably not 2 weeks.
Look, let's be quite honest. Things will not be back to normal, if they ever are back to normal, for a year. Maybe a year and a half. We're not going to be able to do things without worrying about coronavirus until they invent a vaccine. And if that happens in a year and a half, that will be the fastest vaccine ever invented in the history of vaccines. So, yeah, don't hold your breath.
I suppose mild spoilers for the movie Contagion, but it's a society-driven narrative, so like it's not really driven by spoilers. But the vaccine for the disease in Contagion gets invented about halfway through the movie, and then there's still a whole half a movie's worth of shit to sort out afterwards. But
that movie is set in America though, so
it's set in the world, Lang.
nah, it's set in America. Very different.
America's set in the world, but ask an American that and they'll be like, wait, I don't understand.
In draconian news, which like we have mentioned before, Dan Andrews likes to dabble in like mild authoritarianism now and again. He really likes clamping down on protesters and making it hard for that. But Victorian police have used quarantine powers to halt a refugee rights protest, even though social distancing laws were being observed, mainly because protesters protested in a line of their cars with only 2 people in each car.
Yeah, so they're doing the socially distanced, just like protest motorcade. This is a refugee rights protest at the Belmantra Hotel in Preston, which is also being used as a refugee prison. Shout out to the Belmantra for also being a prison.
Well done, guys.
If you want to go stay in what is apparently a pretty decent prison, they do also take prisoner guests in some of their non-prison rooms.
Yeah, it's a 3-star prison.
So I'm guessing the laws that they used were because it was non-essential travel.
I think that is the law that they cited there, but it's this ridiculous situation where, like, yeah, you're outside and you're not meant to be outside, so we're going to slap you with fines and try and arrest you and that sort of thing. So Victoria Police's statement on this was, while Victoria Police respects the public's right to protest, citation needed, these are extraordinary times and the health and safety of every Victorian needs to be our number one priority at this time. Note it's the health and safety of every Victorian and not the health and safety of the refugees who are being held in confined quarters in close proximity to each other. They're saying their complaints are that they can't practice social distancing and they don't have access to things like hand sanitizer. This isn't just let them out. It's like help them not get coronavirus. That's the protest, is just like give them some hand sanitizer, let them sit apart from each other. But the Victoria Police said, no, it's important to respect people's health and safety. And also in the article, the photo is a police officer leaning in to talk to the drivers of one of the cars, just clearly within about 30 centimeters of the guy. So, like, whatever, Victoria Police.
They want to protect the health and safety of every Victorian, not everyone in Victoria. Very important distinction to be made there.
Yeah,
every Victorian in terms of, like, highly conservative people in, like, big button-up shirts.
Every Victorian government official. This is the danger also that you see. This is the red flag when any law like this one has at the discretion of the police, which I believe that this is like police can, arrest you or fine you for breaching social distancing rules at their discretion. And that just means whenever the hell they want, basically for any reason. If a cop doesn't like something you're doing, now they have a reason that they can be like, I don't like this. Let's use this at our discretion law to discretionarily arrest you. You'll notice that they very rarely arrest, rich, white, older people or, government officials or...
They let George Pell go to New South Wales.
Exactly. He went to New South Wales. They could have stopped him at the border at their discretion and gone, oh, you're doing something wrong, bloody go to jail. They could have sent him straight to jail. Imagine if they'd sent him to jail for bloody breaching coronavirus rules. It's unlikely, though. it's unlikely. But if he was...
That would have been incredible.
Yeah, if he was poor or young or protesting or, in any way not a white middle-class person, he probably could have been in a lot more trouble.
Police powers in a lot of areas are pretty clearly sort of governed by law, and when a legislator says this is going to be just like up to police discretion, it means that they've drawn a line in legislation, and inside that line, the police are basically just a gang.
Like, specific laws are there not just to, for a reason to arrest people, but also for a reason to not arrest people. If a law is quite specific, it means the cops can't arrest you unless you're doing a very specific thing. If they're not specific, they can bloody make it up.
So in like QAnon, Jeffrey Epstein brain, conspiracy theory fueled like bullshit, there is stuff going around that there's 2 drugs which are really good. Depending on where you read it, they're either potentially maybe helpful at easing symptoms of COVID-19 or potentially even helping people before they get it to like reduce the chances of getting it. Because of that, the other end of the conspiracy theory is that they are straight out cures for corona. You don't have to worry about it. You just take some of it right now and you are good to go. You do not have to worry about coronavirus. And so our level-headed, measured and responsible government is giving out deeds to people to make as much as they want.
Wait, specifically, you didn't mention the name of the drug. It's hydroxychloroquine.
So hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine.
The study that showed hydroxychloroquine was a useful drug is hilariously bad.
There's no good evidence for it. None.
They had a sample size of like 20 people, and as they were doing the testing, basically the restriction was if somebody went from general care in the hospital because they had coronavirus to the ICU, they had to stop testing that person. And so it's a test of a drug that if it really went bad and they went to the ICU, they were just excluded from the study instead of like, oh, that was a bad one. They were just like, let's not talk about them though. One person died and they were excluded from the study. So of course it's going to show up of no fatalities because if you're like, oh, if you died, you don't get counted, then you're going to come up with no deaths at the end.
The person who died, was it just one? It may have even been 2, but they were in the experimental group. They were the people being given the drug. Nobody who wasn't given the drug died in that study.
Yeah.
So that study, if anything, showed that it was safer to not take the drug. But dumb study, ignore it.
So the federal government has confirmed that the therapeutic goods registration requirements has been waived for those 2 drugs to allow them to be imported and stockpiled, which is good news for Clive Palmer.
Yeah, billionaire troublemaker Clive Palmer.
Because he said he will produce 1 million doses of the drug and is set to make a whole bunch of money here. Novartis Pharmaceuticals Australia. This is all reporting in The Guardian. They've also confirmed that they'll provide doses. The federal government is investing $1.5 million to, quote, support guidance for clinicians to ensure they are given the best possible advice on managing COVID-19 patients. So really a lot of wiggle room in there to sort of say, hey, we've got some experimental drugs that we do not know if they work or not that will allow some of our mates to get real rich off of.
No, I just like this idea that the government's paying $1.5 million to support guidance for clinicians. The guidance is like, maybe it works. Pay me $1.5 million. I can shrug at anyone.
Yeah, clinicians already have guidance about what drugs to prescribe. It's called our current drug and medical guidance friggin' system, and it seems to work pretty decently most of the time. The really shitty thing about this is it's not just a pointless drug that's going to waste a bunch of money. It's not just something people will take and will have some nasty side effects. This is actually a drug which is useful for certain people. It's a treatment for lupus. Some people have to take this to be healthy, and now those people are having a lot of trouble getting hold of the drugs they need. And those drugs are now becoming super, super expensive because people are buying them up and then off-selling them as some quack coronavirus cure. It's a useful drug. It's just not a useful drug for coronavirus.
Well, maybe it is.
If you got lupus, give it a shot.
That's the thing. We've only tried it on 20 people, and we kind of ignored most of the results of that study. Maybe it'll turn out that it is useful. But
the free market works, baby. Woo!
Yeah, sure. Maybe eating rocks is useful for coronavirus. We haven't tried it out enough.
And then to finally cap off our corona news, perennial bad guys, Border Force, are the ones to blame for the Ruby Princess saga, apparently.
Just there's evidence that's come out that the Ruby Princess plague ship checked with Border Force, and they were like, yep, you can dock. It's cool.
It's just... Border Force purely existed... Border Force purely existed for people like Tony Abbott and Josh Frydenberg is a big part of it as well, to just sort of like cosplay as the cops that Peter Dutton was, that they'll never get to be. Like they got to sort of parade around like Border Force, like even the name. I remember there was a really good podcast called Pure Poison back in the day that was like talking about them. And Dave Gorkroger, one of the hosts, always had this, whenever they came up, he had this little like, Border Force, which is the perfect way to say their name, because it's just a manly man group of manly men, and even the women that are there, to just like, it's just like embodied propaganda. It's fucking nothing else. It doesn't even have a good name. It's just, we're the country that's strong on borders. Here's our border force, our throbbing, large border force. Hell yeah. Come get it.
It's a fascism bait name. It's like police force, you know, and a lot of countries kind of like to rebrand that as the
firefighters.
Yeah.
Fucking fascist.
But it's like, it could be immigration, you know, service. It could be, you know, all sorts of things which are like, oh, we're helping people. We're doing the border force, space force, bloody army fighters.
Yeah, so this has been a back and forth of like whose fault is it between Border Force and New South Wales Health, and then basically, this full like, I don't know if it was an audio log or just like an official statement, but a Border Force officer told the harbour master that she needed to check with the supervisor, and 15 minutes later she called back and said the ship could dock, and this fact came out, and in response Border Force was still like, oh no, it's still New South Wales' responsibility.
We made the decision, but we shouldn't have. It should have been someone else.
Our whole brand is being just big macho, like strong Border Force, but when we're in trouble, it's New South Wales Health's fault. I'm sorry.
All right,
let's round things out with some full suite climate news and a good old fashioned Lang rant.
Yeah,
it's your time.
So it's my time.
Strap in, ladies and gentlemen. Lang's here with another climate rant.
Talk about the environment. Right? If we called it friggin' Enviro Force, get the Department of Land, Water and Forestry Resources or whatever they're called, and call them Land Force. And then they'd get a lot more budget.
Oh, we've got Land Care instead, which is the opposite direction.
Land Care. Land Fight.
Land Fight.
So, you've probably heard that...
Dirt punch!
No, I got nothing else. You've probably heard that coronavirus, like, because everyone's in lockdown, you know, we're not doing air travel, we're not driving to work and everything, that pollution is getting better, air quality is getting better. Oh, it turns out we were the virus. But... And I'm not going to go into that. We're not the virus. Capitalism is the virus. Land force. But it is amazing at this point. And we live in Melbourne, okay? Melbourne's air quality is fucking excellent pretty much most of the time. For a major city, we have really good air quality. But then people who live in places like Delhi or Los Angeles, awful air quality most of the time. Except now. Air quality right now, coronavirus, no one's driving around. It's just amazing. Everyone's like, holy shit, I forgot what color the sky was. Like, New Delhi usually has an air pollution, and this is like the index they use of air pollution. Anything above 25 is considered unhealthy by the WHO. New Delhi usually has an air pollution index of about 200 on a good day. On a bad day, 900, okay? 25 is bad. But now... thanks to coronavirus, it's hovering somewhere around 20 or 30. On a good day, it can get as low as 7. And that's like, everyone in New Delhi is like, I forgot breathing was good. I forgot, literally, the sky is blue for the first time that we can remember. You can see the Himalayas from large Indian cities.
It's just extremely darkly ironic that coronavirus is a respiratory, like, that COVID is a respiratory problem, where it's just like, hey, man, as well as showing you how nice it is to breathe, fuck, that's it's just really grim.
No, but actually that's quite interesting.
That's fucking dark.
That's people in places with worse air pollution actually suffer more from coronavirus. They have higher mortality rates. They have higher incidence rates, because if you're already suffering from air pollution, obviously that gives you, asthma. It makes everything breathing related worse. Coronavirus is worse for you. If you live somewhere like New Delhi and you get coronavirus, you're already starting, you're at a much higher risk than someone who lives in like Melbourne. So the fact that the air quality is getting much, much better in a lot of places is really like super, super lucky, because it's going to mean that a lot of people are going to suffer less from coronavirus. But the interesting thing here is that this is the first time since we've like had this very industrial car-centric city systems that this has ever been able to happen. This is the first time ever that Los Angeles has stopped driving since they friggin' started driving a lot in like the 50s. And so this is the first time we've been able to actually look at these effects and go, holy shit, Los Angeles can be like this. New Delhi can be like this. This is something nice. This is probably something people want to keep. And like a lot of things with coronavirus, it's showing us that there are things that didn't have to be the way they were.
So on that, the idea that like it doesn't have to be this way, what we've had since like for however long is the idea of a CBD in a city, the central business district. The reason why we have them is because as businesses sort of built up and they had more administration and bureaucracy, they needed to get information between departments and between businesses super quick. But we only had like typewriters and shit like that. So you could have a typewriter at home, but you still had to get that information to someone else, like physically. So it just made sense for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, it made sense to have everyone in these offices all at once. But while that has been the established model, small incremental changes like the internet have picked up. And so now we'd have no need for that sort of thing to take place. A central business district could become obsolete after this global pandemic, because we can not only work from home, but we can stay at home and people enjoy it. Like, I genuinely think this could be as monumental, obviously not on the feminist front, but just from a social perspective, like a constructive, systemic perspective. This could be as big as after World War II, after World War I and World War II, when the women in the workforce that had to prop up the country and who could prove beyond a doubt that they could do the work as good as men went, we're not going back home, we want to keep working, we want money for ourselves. You're now going to have a whole bunch of people going, we don't want to go back to work, we want to stay at home. I like this more. Why do I have to spend 2 hours every day going there and back? Why am I giving you 10 hours of my week to do that 5 times a week? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I even know of like businesses, like at a business level, I know of businesses that are like, oh man, why do we need to go back to normal? Like everybody working remotely, everyone's productive. We could just save so much on rent. We could just like get a co-working space and meet, once a week in Monday morning or something. And every other time we would just work from home. Like even the bosses of some businesses are getting on board with this. So that's pretty exciting.
And it's really interesting also because it's a chance where you can see what businesses and like universities and schools and stuff said they couldn't do, and then what they actually could do in terms of working from home. Because you've had a lot of businesses and unis for a long time that have been like, oh, look, we can't have you working from home. It just doesn't work. And this is something that especially people with disability have been calling for a long time. If you have certain kinds of disabilities, it makes it much, much harder to go in and work in an office environment or go into uni and be in a lecture environment. But a lot of places haven't given these allowances. They've said, oh, you just can't work from home. It just doesn't work. You can't do the work. But now they've been forced to do it. Turns out, not that hard.
Do it.
A lot of people with disabilities are now like, what the fuck? We could have been doing this all along. Are you shitting me?
And that's the thing as well. It's not even just that they told us that it just wouldn't work, and it turns out it does. It's that it works under the extreme pressure of a recession leading into a depression with a global pandemic. Under the worst, most extreme circumstances possible, we've proved quite easily that a lot of people can work from home. It just has to threaten capital before they admit it.
It's there's studies that come out every now and then, pre-corona, of like a business has trialed having its employees work only 4 days a week instead of 5.
Yeah.
And it turns out everyone's just as productive. The business's revenues have gone up, blah, 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 blah. And
It always works really well.
you talk about it with your own boss, you're just like, hey, what a neat study. And they're like, crazy.
Yeah. we couldn't possibly do things differently.
No way.
And so that's one thing that people are doing differently. And obviously there's a lot of workplaces where you can't work from home. If you're working in hospitality or construction or friggin' whatever, you're a doctor. Yeah, sure.
I'll just email you some bricks.
A huge amount of people could easily work from home, or honestly not at all, real estate agents.
Yeah.
But
hey, Lang, somebody's got to make houses more expensive.
if we didn't have middlemen, then we wouldn't. So the other thing,
I do just want to hammer that. That's the thing that I'm obsessed with. Is this idea? If they're in a world with no real estate agents, if you're like, oh, you need them though. Imagine in a world with real estate agents, would houses just stop being bought and sold?
No,
it just goes away.
Suddenly you've got landlords having to work directly with their renters.
Suddenly you have landlords thinking it's not worth their time and money and just not getting into the investment market, and housing prices go down.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It turns out it's a lot of work to administer a house. Good.
Yeah, sounds like work.
So
You should get paid for that.
I was outside for my legally permissible jog the other day, and I looked around myself while jogging. Okay,
He's incriminating himself on the podcast. Get it.
I looked around, and I noticed how few cars there were, obviously, because people aren't going to work and shit.
I was outside the other day. Satire. It's satire.
So I was on the tram the other day, in a virtual reality game experience. But you look around, and we're very used to seeing roads full of cars and shit, okay? And we're constantly having to build more roads because there's more cars. And suddenly there's no cars on the roads. And it really makes you think, okay, why... We don't have many cars on the roads. We haven't got rid of a bunch of people, obviously. People are still living their lives. They're still shopping. They're not visiting friends as much, sure. But they're doing a lot of things. They're just not commuting to work like they were. And it made me think that most or a huge proportion of car travel is commuting to work. It's that rush hour. It's some large chunk. We'll have to see if we can find some statistics. Some that I've seen from like 2012 are like, it's 1/3 of all car travel is commuting to work or something like that. If people didn't have work, they'd obviously still need to drive here and there. They'd visit friends, they'd take their kids to school or go shopping or something. But those are often much more local journeys, and they're not all happening at the same time. And obviously there's much fewer of them. You don't need as many roads. Our cities are built for cars, and they're built for the quantity of cars you need for commuting. We're often sold the concept of roads and all of the associated road infrastructure as a public good, as like, we're all paying taxes, they're all going for roads, they're for people. They're not for people, though, because if it was just up to people, we wouldn't need that many roads. A lot of the quantity of roads we have are for businesses. But businesses don't pay for roads. People pay for roads. Taxpayers pay for roads. Businesses don't pay for roads, even though when you commute, that is entirely because you're going to work, and any other work expense should be paid by your business. These are taxpayer-funded roads. We're subsidizing commuting for businesses that want to live in a convenient location and want to have employees come in so they can keep an eye on them. In order to make all that happen, in order to have all your employees coming into an office where you can watch them, the friggin' country has to build 1 million roads and maintain those roads and have car accidents and have air pollution and all of the other things that happen. And it just, I'm very socialist now.
This is the point where every so often I just I dare to dream a happy dream, but I can see a world where because of the working from home change and because of the demand for that, and like you said, for the fact that people don't have to drive, I can see this really nice type of suburban city where everything's within walking or riding distance. We just have like smaller hubs where because people. So this is my genuine dream. This isn't just like we've got utopia and everything's walking distance. Genuinely, the issue that we have at the moment is that people with lower incomes, people with more disadvantaged socioeconomic situations currently are forced to live in suburbs that are further out from the CBD because that's where rent is cheaper. Because rich people don't have to live that far out and they don't want to live that far out. They don't want to travel all that way on roads in cars. And so that's why you have that urban sprawl. And as traditionally happens, unless it's a really picturesque place or for whatever reason, the further out you get, the lower the socioeconomic advantages of the people that are there. My utopia is that once we decentralize away from the CBD and that concentration of labor in certain spots, we can start to have like different wage levels and different types of jobs throughout all these different suburbs, and all these different people saying, I don't want to leave. I don't have a car now. I should just be able to walk to get something that I want. I want to walk to a cinema. I want to walk to a small shopping center. And we could genuinely start to design cities again, or like outer suburbs, in a different way. That's really exciting. I think the first thing we should probably look at doing is setting up like a national infrastructure for broadband so everywhere has perfect access to the utility that is required to do this, because it's not a fucking fun service. It's not just entertainment for Netflix. It's a fucking utility that they undermine, the scum fucks. So I just have hope, you know.
I really like the image now. I'm just picturing somebody who like works in urban design listening to the podcast who's like so mad right now where they're just like, you got what? Well, we've been talking about this for fucking decades. Why didn't you talk about blah, blah, blah? And it's like, mate, get your own podcast. Be louder about it. Yeah. It's good shit.
And then come on the podcast. We'll have you on the podcast.
No, send us an email. I would love to have an email. All right. Here's something interesting I discovered recently while writing education programs. Is Amsterdam. Okay, you've heard about this, you've seen this. Amsterdam. Fuck off. Amsterdam, city of bikes. If you've ever been to Amsterdam, they've got two things. They've got weed and bikes. Everyone in the inner city of Amsterdam fucking rides bikes. You can't get a car through there. It's all bikes. All of the public servants, all the bankers, everyone fucking rides bikes. It's amazing. And you have this thing where you're like, this is great, but it's Europe, it's Amsterdam, they've got these little streets, it's just they're doing things differently.
Amsterdam in their little streets.
Yeah, they do have little streets. It's Europe, they're all quaint.
They got little streets and they got weed and they got bikes. And you talk to someone from Amsterdam and you're like, oh, you got weed? And they're like, well, yeah, I guess. And you're like, oh, and you got bikes? And they're like, fuck yeah, we got bikes.
Yeah. You can't ride the bikes on weed. Maybe you can, I don't know, I don't care. Go on to the Google, look up pictures of Amsterdam in the 70s. Amsterdam in the 70s looks like fucking New York. Cars, wall to wall. It was a standard car city. It was all cars, car parks, everything. They changed that. They took a car-heavy city.
Car force.
They took out all the cars. They replaced it all with bikes. And they had to fight a bit to make that happen. And this was largely because of, there was an increase in car accidents. There was a few good, community groups and concerned parents groups and stuff got together. They said, this car stuff is bad. Bit by bit, that whole city has transformed into being a fully bike city. And now you look at it and you go, this is great. We could do that with fucking every city. And you take places like the middle of Melbourne, the middle of New York, Times Square. You could drive through Times Square before. You can't now. It's just pedestrians. It's fantastic. We love it.
You could totally drive through Times Square today. Because they're under lockdown.
Folks, we love it.
I really, if you've listener enjoyed this conversation about city planning and stuff, there is a YouTube series, YouTube video maker guy called Do Not Eat, who it just does phenomenal video series explaining this sort of stuff and does a much better and more informed job of talking about it than we do. So I just really want to put a strong shout out to that channel. And in the show notes, I'll put a link to a specific video of his, which is about how highways kill cities. And it has really just permanently welded me to the idea that highways are a bunch of shit.
Sounds like we're in shout outs.
If you've seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it's all about that.
Is it?
Yeah. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? They're trying to get rid of Toontown so they can put a highway through.
Oh, yeah.
It's based on Los Angeles Los Angeles used to have the best public transport system in the world, and now it has like the worst.
Fucking Judge Doom.
So another shout out that I want to make today is to Don Harwin, the New South Wales Arts Minister, who travelled to his regional holiday home when the rest of the state was told not to. He was fined $1,000 and later resigned.
He was fined $1,000 and later resigned, and then it came out that he was at his holiday home already when the lockdown was announced. And so he stayed there to avoid breaking it. And then he got fined anyway. And Gladys Berejiklian, the New South Wales Premier, was like, it's still appropriate that he resigned. And I'm just looking at this story as it developed over the last week, being like, oh, you idiot, you shouldn't have broken lockdown. And then why isn't he having to resign? And at least he got a fine that's a bloody paltry fine. Oh, and he did resign. And apparently he shouldn't have resigned. And no, but the Premier still says that it's good. And I don't fucking know.
Do you reckon he'd been raising a fuss and this was just some excuse they found to rub him out?
No, because they tried to defend him for a whole week. This occasionally Australian politics just throws a story at me and I just look at it just at the end of it just with a completely dead face and I'm like, yep, all right, sure, yep, it's all good.
We still don't even know what the go was with the au pairs.
Yeah, hey, remember Bridget McKenzie?
Oh my God, she's probably still there in cabinet. Where is she during coronavirus? I guarantee she's doing some shady shit.
Remember when Scott Morrison misled Parliament over all the corruption scandals? Oh, he's doing a great job because of coronavirus. Now, though, my political philosophy is when a big disaster hits, whoever's in charge should stay in charge, and afterwards they did a great job and they get to stay in charge again. Any crisis, whatever's going on, don't worry about it. That's previous chapter. Heroes. That's last season. That plot line is dropped.
I 100% guarantee there are rorts going on that we'll find about in 6 months. We'll have to... You've got 6 months to come up with a really good coronavirus rorts, pun newspaper journalists, so don't fuck this up.
Come on, journalists.
Coronavirus. Co-rort 19.
Coronavirus.
Well, we're not journalists. It's not our job to come up with puns about rorts.
No.
We're comedians, for God's sake.
No, barely. The actions for this week, as we mentioned before, if you are, if you've tried reaching out to your landlord and you've gotten one of those horrible mealy mouth emails in return saying you should potentially draw from your super or whatnot, we want to hear from you. If you are organising any sort of rent strike, rent amnesty, coalition of renters, we want to hear from you. If you are part of a union who is potentially organising that sort of stuff, we really want to hear from you. notgoodpod@protonmail.com or message any of our socials. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Shoot us a message. We really want to hear from you. Or if you're listening to this and you know someone in that position, get them to get in touch or even give us some contact details if they're cool with it, and we'll reach out to them as well.
This shit's really important. We want to be able to shout out who's good. I know that the Unemployed Workers Union, as always, is working on this stuff, but I'm sure that they're not the only people in the country who are working on it, and the more yelling about this, the better, in my opinion.
Yeah. It might seem might seem like we up those guys a lot. Are we getting kickbacks from them? No, they don't pay us. That's not on brand for them.
Wait, they're not?
Whatchamacallit? Heated has a podcast now.
Yes, I want to pick this up.
Go.
I am a huge Heated stan. Heated is a newsletter. It's where I just get all of my climate news nowadays, because it's all in one place, and it's kind of funny, and she tells you to hydrate yourself. But also she's doing a podcast now. It's fantastic. It's all of the stuff you need to know and the stuff you should be angry about climate change, but also everything related to climate change, which is everything. 100% check out Heated. They have a bunch of free newsletters that you can subscribe to. And if you pay a bit of money, you get their more frequent newsletters and you can send them comments and whatever. But yes, cannot stand that one hard enough.
Final action. If you are a High Court Justice, I just want to say, bad call. Think about what you've done. Thanks for listening. If you've got any comments or questions or, that's it. That's the whole list. Get in touch at NotGoodPod on the social media and notgoodpod@protonmail.com.
Not Good Enough is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We want to acknowledge their elders and point out the fact that their lands were never ceded.